Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
So happy to be back in studio today with Morgan Streetman. I'm Roxanne Wilder, and we have Shriner in here with us. Pat George, he has not broken a foot. He has not had anything bad happen to him. He is enjoying a vacation, which I started doing the math on this. I don't think Pat's missed a day in 2020, the crazy year that it's been.
He hasn't. I keep telling him to take time off. I'm his boss. I got to sign off on it. I'm like, you're going to have unused vacation days. Go.
Get out of here.
You need to give him a lump of coal, Santa Claus. We were talking before the show. You're getting ready to do some of your Santa appearances. You got the big white beard, which you normally have, but
right.
looking good. Looks like you've combed it well.
I'm doing a video shoot today for a church, and then I do have an actual in-person Christmas pop-up, coffee/cocktail bar. So I got to figure out how we're going to do the photos in this age of COVID Christmas.
Yeah, maybe you have like a piece of plexiglass in your lap between you and the child, and then one for them to sit on?
This is an adult thing. This is going to be at a pop-up Christmas place in downtown St. Pete. I did it last year as well. Last year, there was lots of hands.
Party?
No, it's an ugly sweater party.
Okay.
But trust me, there were some people there that were naughty about it. There were a couple of people like, can I put my hand on your, and I'm like, that won't show on the camera. No, please don't. People like to put hands on Santa. It's not nice.
I know. And I've seen the photos online now of kids going to see Santa, and they're standing at a table a good 10 feet away from him, kind of shouting their Christmas wants and wishes at him,
right.
Like a press conference almost. It is a different vibe this year.
It is very different. And there's a lot of virtual opportunity to connect with Santa. If people go to moneytalk1010.com/Santa, they can schedule a video conference and have some family members join in, up to 4 people. And you can video live with Santa in the North Pole. So
there you go.
Let's get to Morgan and what you have to talk about today.
Well, a lot of things. I'm still focused on the election. I know a lot of people are not and want to move past it. It seems like, although if you really think about it, I think the tide is turning. There's a tipping point in situations like this, and it really felt to me like last week we hit a tipping point. Now, what you see in the media, at least the mainstream media, most of the corporate media outlets, is a push to just move on. Just accept that Joe Biden won. Don't believe what your senses, your 5 senses might be telling you about it, and the questions that might be coming to your mind, just accept it. And they're pushing so hard, and I pointed this out in previous shows. I mean, can't you feel the push? Have you ever before seen this concept, this idea of the office of the president-elect, and Joe Biden's giving all these speeches as a president-elect and all this media focus on him as a president-elect? I don't remember that from previous presidents-elect, and I certainly don't remember. First of all, they've never used the term of office of the president-elect. That's not actually an elected office, and hey, by the way, nobody's actually elected until the Electoral College, the electors, meet and vote, and that doesn't happen for another 2 weeks. So nobody's been elected right now. There are serious questions about the results and many different facets of that. But why is the media pushing so hard to tell you, no, there's nothing to see here. Move along. Joe Biden is the president-elect. He's holding the office of president-elect. Well, he gave a speech. I don't know if you saw it. My guess is you didn't, because he gave a speech, a Thanksgiving address, and only about, and of course it's all virtual, because that's the only way you're ever going to see Joe Biden anymore. I mean, he broke his foot, allegedly, playing with his dog. The man is not up to the job. Let's just be honest with each other. He's not up to the job physically, and he's not up to the job mentally. That's so obvious from the campaign trail, from his different appearances, from his speeches. Joe Biden's not all there. I'm not trying to be insulting, but I'm just trying to be a realist. I'm trying to speak truth with you now, as opposed to smearing over some veneer of BS like the mainstream media does about this situation. The mainstream media spent more time talking about Joe Biden's dogs than it has about Hunter Biden's laptop, the real dog of the Biden family. Hunter Biden, he's the real dog, and he's the dog. He's actually the retriever, right? He goes out and he retrieves the money and gives half of it to his father, and that's come out. That's in the text messages that's on the laptop, but the media didn't cover that before the election. A lot of people didn't even hear about that because you had to be paying attention to certain media outlets that are not considered to be mainstream, even though they have millions and millions of watchers, listeners, viewers, people who go to these sites, and they're giving some of the best analysis and commentary on this situation that you can find. You're not going to get it from CNN. You know, the only viewers CNN really has are at the airports because they have captive audience, and that's what they want. That's how it is in a communist country. You just have one channel, and it tells you what to think, and that's what CNN wants to be.
Hunter Biden being called a retriever is probably an insult to retrievers and probably the nicest sort of dog classification you could give them.
Well, at least golden retrievers are insulted, I'm sure. But yeah, Hunter Biden, you don't hear about that. You know, we were going to try to talk about some of it last week. I don't know if we'll get back around to it, but it's just amazing to me that that's not a big issue. The President of the United States would be totally compromised by all of the things that his son has done. And let's face it, those interviews we heard with that guy, Tony Bobulinski, before the election, Biden himself, Joe Biden, is compromised. His entire family is compromised. They made a business for years and years out of selling the Biden family name and selling access to Joe Biden. So this person who can't, stand in front of a screen that doesn't say Office of the President-elect on it. They're trying to push this into your head. Just believe it. Come on, just believe it. We'll just keep repeating it. And remember, a lie repeated often enough becomes the truth. At least that's their theory. And it's a good theory because in so many cases it's true. This is propaganda. It's propaganda. They're pushing it into your mind. They're brainwashing you slowly, visually, verbally, with the sounds, all of the appearances, all the statements. He's named a cabinet. You don't get to name a cabinet if you're not president. So, of course, he's president. That's what they want you to think. But he gives this Thanksgiving speech, and I tell you, this really I thought was funny in a couple of ways. One, 1,000 people watched his Thanksgiving address. Now, allegedly, almost 80 million people voted for this guy. That's just simply not true. But he can't get 1,000 people to watch his Thanksgiving Eve address where he reads to them from a teleprompter. Now, this is the guy who calls himself a devout Catholic, and I thought this was so funny because it's yet another gaffe from Joe Biden. You got to listen here to the way that he pronounces the word psalmist. Now, those of you that have been to church, maybe read the Bible, in the Bible there's this book called the Psalms, right? And it's a bunch of songs that were mostly written by King David of Israel, and it is a very famous book. It's in the smack dab in the middle of the Bible, and I think it's the longest book in the Bible, actually. But a lot of people like the Psalms. You hear me using that, it's Psalms, and it's pronounced Psalms. And I would think almost everybody would know that, right? But let's hear from our friend, the president-elect, as he talks about the Psalms.
And if we do, and I'm sure we can proclaim the psalmist, with the psalmist who wrote these following words.
The psalmist.
The Lord is my strength and my shield.
I mean, it's like, has this guy ever even darkened the door of a church? I mean, obviously he has. But who would call it the psalmist? I'm going to read the Psalms.
Maybe he had palm reader on his mind.
Maybe so. I mean, if you want to, I guess there's some way to come up with it. Obviously, he misread the teleprompter. I mean, either that or somebody typing up the teleprompter. Is that what they do? Does someone actually type up the teleprompter?
They write it for you, or, in this case, for Joe Biden, they would write all the text and he would read from it, but it's a good idea to read that before you read it cold.
Right, but let's say you typed up a speech in a Word document. Does that get uploaded to the teleprompter, or does somebody else then retype it into the teleprompter?
There's a way to upload it. You have systems. You have like AP News, and you pop it in there, and then it populates into the teleprompter.
Okay, all right. Well, somehow, some way, I'm guessing he misread it. He saw the word psalmist, and he thought, oh, brain malfunction, that can't be right, and his brain told him it's palmist. This guy is not capable of making the kind of decisions, and I'd say I'm sorry, but I'm really not sorry. The Democrats ran this cretin, this old man, who's not mentally or physically up to the job. The fault is on them. They're the ones that ought to be apologizing to us about the situation, that this was the candidate that they ran. He's just not up for the job, folks. We've been telling you that for months. You ought to be aware of that. We'll be right back.
And we're back on the Morgan Streetman Show. Roxanne Wilder here, Shriner as well. If you want to be a part of the show, give us a call, 888-404-1010. Lots to cover today. I know, Morgan, at some point, maybe now, we'll get into the Johns Hopkins study and find out the latest news. They retracted it. So we'll talk about that in a moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, that it's a little, I wouldn't, my conclusion on it wouldn't be that they retracted it. The editors pulled the story, but unfortunately it takes a little bit more, discussion of it to really understand what that means, because the author didn't retract it. So it's not like the person who performed the study said, oh, there's a problem with it. I'm retracting this because there's a problem with it. For political reasons, and they admit this, for political reasons, the editors pulled the story, or the study. Well, it was a written study, but it's all still legitimate. It hasn't been retracted like a study that they published and they got some comments and they realized they had an error in their data. That type of a retraction is totally different. So, but of course, the news, the mainstream media, that's what they want to tell you. That study was retracted. Nothing to see here. Keep moving along. And that's the way they treat people. That's the way they treat you. That's the way they treat me in this country. And I find it disturbing that we're being treated so stupidly. And unfortunately, I think they've been a little bit successful with the different methods that they've used to shorten our attention spans, to cause us to lose our memory, our short-term memory, our ability to remember things, and we become totally beholden to whatever the latest messaging is from the TV or social media, from the screen. We'll put it that way, from the phone, from the iPad, whatever it may be. We have to look at our screen to remember what's going on, and even to remember what happened. I mean, you remember what happened just a few short weeks ago in the election? A lot of people have kind of moved on. They forgot about that. They forgot that when they went to bed, President Trump was leading in all these major states. They forgot about the fact that there were these very strange vote spikes and vote dumps that occurred early in the morning of November 4th. They're forgetting about this, and they're just thinking, well, let's just move on. I mean, I hear people that are even ostensibly supporters of President Trump or Republicans or whatever, and they say, well, we just got to move on to the Georgia Senate races. Now, we just got to keep in mind what's really important. I mean, I think you're really missing the point there if that's the way you're thinking about it, because what's really important is, do you think you're going to win the Georgia Senate races if the entire election system is compromised from top to bottom? You better think again.
Do you think we've been conditioned over the last 5 years to consume media in that way? Well, hey, let's just move on, whether it's grabby headlines, short Twitter stories, or something that they just don't follow up on in a deeper way.
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially, I'd say, what I'm saying is that, think about it. People don't read articles. Articles are shorter now. They're more like blog posts. They used to be longer, more in-depth examinations. They don't write longer articles anymore because people don't read them. They don't want to read them. It's very sad. People don't read books anymore. Sometimes it takes a long time to truly develop a thought, develop an argument, and sometimes it takes a sustained focus and attention to understand it. It can't just be understood in a little blurb headline, but that's what we've moved to. It's all about the blurbs. It's a quick hit. People want to, and then they got to keep checking what's going on. Got to keep refreshing the page. What's the next blurb I'm supposed to take into my mind? And, I think this is a very sad development in our intellectual culture It goes right along with that movie Idiocracy, which we've talked about any number of times. The stupidification of Americans and, frankly, other people all around the world. And it's just increasing. But I know there are plenty of people out there who are still with it. They're still paying attention. I know some of them are listening to this show, and they're still analyzing it, and they can see, it is so clear that there were major issues in this election. It's almost unfathomable. Think about some of the facts here. Some of the facts that are so important. And people the mainstream media doesn't want you to think about this, but you need to think about it. President Trump received more votes in this past election. If you assume that the count, even just as it stands, as it is reported, is accurate, he received more votes than any previous incumbent seeking re-election. He got 11 million more votes than he did in 2016. That's almost unheard of. Barack Obama, who is one of the, considered to be one of the most popular recent presidents, and you have to acknowledge that there were a lot of people that were passionate about Barack Obama. He could at least draw a crowd. He's not a Joe Biden kind of a guy that can't get 10 people to show up in support of him, gets 4 people for his car parade. Barack Obama could draw a crowd. There's no doubt about that. But Barack Obama in 2012 got 3.5 million fewer votes than he got in 2008. It is not typical that an incumbent gets more votes, and certainly not more votes on the order that President Trump did, 11 million votes. And why did he get so many more votes? Because he performed so well with all the different demographic groups that the media, remember, the media was telling us he was not going to perform well with these groups. He wasn't going to be popular. You have 95% of Republicans voted for President Trump. That's pretty strong. They tried to say there was this huge undercurrent of Republicans who weren't going to support President Trump, the Never Trumpers, the Lincoln Project. Apparently, that was a very small minority of people. In reality, 1 in 20. Very small. He did well, as we would expect, with working-class voters, working-class whites. There wasn't this flight away from him as they've suggested would occur. But this is what's sort of important. He got the highest share of minority votes of any Republican since 1960. He grew his support among black voters by 50% since 2016. And, of course, Joe Biden's support as a result among black voters fell well below 90%, which is unheard of for Democrats to get that low of support. In fact, typically if the Democrats don't get above 90% of the black vote, they wouldn't expect to win the election. He got an increased share of the Hispanic vote. He captured, President Trump did, 35% of the Hispanic vote. So he did much better with minority groups. Now, what's interesting, when you look at the state swings, typically Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin swing with Ohio and Iowa. Those states tend to go together just like they did in the 2016 election. Now, Ohio tends to follow Florida. Ohio and Florida are almost always together. Now, in this current election, President Trump won Florida by a significant margin, and he won Ohio by a significant margin. But somehow, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin all flipped and went for Biden. And remember, this is after Biden said that he was going to ban fracking. Biden and Harris, in the debates and other places, both made statements that they were going to ban fracking, probably the most important industry to the state of Pennsylvania. And people were up in arms in Pennsylvania. And I guess we've forgotten that. You had commentators in the mainstream media coming out and saying, "God, you're so stupid, Joe Biden. Now you're definitely going to lose Pennsylvania. There is no way to win Pennsylvania after saying what you just said. It was unnecessary. You could have dodged the question. You could have hidden your real motives. But you had to go out and make this stupid statement in the debate and confirm the fact that, yes, you are going to ban fracking, try to ban fossil fuels, try to enact the Green New Deal. So he makes that statement. Everybody says, oh, there goes Pennsylvania. It's gone. And remember, then President Trump is having rallies in Pennsylvania. Tens of thousands of people are showing up for these rallies, nearly spontaneously. Not a lot of warning given for any of these rallies. So nearly spontaneously, tens of thousands of people are showing up at these rallies. And now we're expected to believe that he lost Pennsylvania. President Trump lost Pennsylvania. That's what we're expected to believe. It just doesn't make any sense. And we're going to get into some of what happened last week, because last week was a big news week for this particular type of news. Sorry, I was moving the mic there. You know, there was a big hearing in Pennsylvania on Wednesday of last week. We're going to cover some quotes from that because I think they're very interesting. You know, I've done all this setup. I didn't even get to the real meat here that I was wanting to get to, some of the peculiarities that really deserve a closer look from this past election. So we'll try to run through some of those, get into the Pennsylvania press conference. We'll try to tell you a little bit about the release of the Kraken last week, which happened nearly at midnight before Thanksgiving. And boy, was a Kraken released in Georgia and Michigan. I mean, Sidney Powell is really delivering on her promises. And don't pay attention to what the media is telling you about her. She is a very credible, very fine lawyer. She's done over 500 federal criminal appeals. I've read a lot of her work. She's really one of the finest lawyers that I've ever paid attention to. We'll be back.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. We really are in a day and age where you're only going to get one brand, one side of the story if you watch mainstream media, and then you have to cobble it together with your knowledge from other sources. And Morgan, you are that other source.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I try to read widely, and, you know, of course, I try to apply a little bit of logic. I don't just consume whatever they serve up, whatever slop they put into the trough. I might not eat it. I'm certainly going to look at it very critically. And, you know, it's interesting because one of the things we were talking about during the break is, you know, we want to get to this COVID study that was published by Johns Hopkins and then depublished. Can I interrupt? Can we come up with a new slogan for the Morgan Streetman Show where news has never tasted better? It's a good comparison to the slop in the trough. Hey, the slop we're serving you, you're going to like it, okay? You're going to like it. But, yeah, during the break, we're talking about, you know, getting to this story, which if we don't get moving, which we probably, I mean, it's going to be tight. It's going to be really tight. No, there's no way to, Roxanne's saying, go, Morgan, go. But I'm saying, look, there's no way to do it. We can't rush through these things because you're going to miss it. You're really going to miss some of these points that are important. But we're going to talk about this COVID study later, and that's probably going to get us banned on YouTube or something like that because that's the new world that we seem to live in, where particularly on social media, there are acceptable viewpoints, there are acceptable things to talk about, and then there are unacceptable ones. And you really need to think about that. I mean, is that the kind of world you want to live in? Have you read the book 1984? Because if you've read the book 1984, you've got to be looking around and saying, we are almost there. Even down to the smart TVs that have the cameras and the microphones always on. That's exactly what the book talks about. But I digress. You know, I wanted to cover some of these, what you might call peculiarities in the election, right? Remember, we talked a little bit about, remember how late on election night President Trump was comfortably ahead? And all of a sudden, about 2 a.m, many of the swing states just stopped counting ballots. They just stopped. And observers were removed from the counting facilities. And then what we learned later is that the counting continued in most cases. So they claimed they were stopping, they got rid of the observers, and then apparently they kept on counting, and they had different excuses for it. Some places they said, well, people need to go to sleep. Everybody needs sleep. Oh, you remember this from past elections, don't you, how we all needed to sleep at 2 a.m.? No. We always stayed up till the count was finished. That's how it's always been done. And then you had in Atlanta, there was a water main break over the equipment. Oh, my God, we might lose the equipment. When it turns out there actually wasn't a water main break. There was a small leak nowhere near the vote counting equipment. The facilities manager said that was way overblown in the news. Ask yourself why. Who reported that? Where did they come up with that story, right? Somebody told them, oh, there's been a water main break. That was part of a plan. That's what's called a blatant lie. They lied to get people out of there, and they kept counting. When the vote counting resumed, there were statistically abnormal vote counts. Now, this has been analyzed by statisticians. These are huge vote counts. You call them vote dumps. Talking about hundreds of thousands of votes being dumped into the system when the quote-unquote counting resumed. And they had an unusually, just call it unbelievably high ratio of Biden to Trump votes. You're talking about 90% and above. In some cases, 99.5%. And you're talking about maybe 160,000 votes or more. Essentially all for Joe Biden. Statistically, that is nearly impossible, okay? That's nearly impossible, and to have happened in so many different places. And really, it's just the 5 or 6 main cities where the fraud occurred. Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, Phoenix, and Las Vegas. Those were where the vote dumps happened. Those cities are where Joe Biden allegedly won the election. It's really just those cities.
And it's Dominion software in those 5 cities as well.
You got Dominion all over the place, and we can't even really get to Dominion, but you got to hear some about Dominion. I recommend you go check out the Kraken. And I was joking with some friends last week about the Kraken. I said, enjoy your Thanksgiving Kraken. But just remember, the one thing that Kraken doesn't taste like is chicken. I'm glad you liked that a little bit. I thought that was funny. I thought that was somewhat humorous.
Jokes.
Everything tastes like chicken. And I was like, what does Kraken taste like? Well, it doesn't taste like chicken, that's for sure. Sidney Powell, one thing you got to say about Sidney Powell is she's not a chicken. She's standing up. And you got to think that she knows that she's a target. We'll just leave it at that. She's a target of all kinds of things right now. So, Linwood as well. Okay, let's talk some more about things that were peculiar on election night. How about the late arriving ballots in Pennsylvania? 23,000 absentee ballots were returned before they were even sent or on the day they were sent. It's not possible that they were returned on the same day or before they were sent. 86,000 have such extraordinary return dates that they raise questions. Like that would be like the day after it was sent, they received a ballot back. That doesn't make any sense. It takes a little bit of time for the mail to be delivered and then for somebody to fill it out and send it back. Even if they filled it out and sent it back the same day they got it, it probably doesn't go until the next day's mail. So there's a lot of questions. That's almost 100,000 absentee ballots that are highly questionable. They didn't match signatures on mail-in ballots anywhere. The rejection rate on mail-in ballots is unbelievably low this election, much lower than any previous election. And President Obama himself said you have to verify those signatures. Of course, that was back in 2008 before they needed to discard that argument, which is just a reality. You got to verify those signatures or you don't know what you're getting. You're counting ballots from people that aren't the people who are supposed to be voting the ballots. So the Democrat Party knows that. Barack Obama, that's how he won his state Senate election, was challenging some of those mail-in ballots and finding out, yeah, they were fraudulent, and they got thrown out, and then he won, and then he got on the path to becoming the great one that he ultimately became. So they didn't match signatures in this election. That's a big deal. There were missing votes. There were 47 USB cards, and we'll try to get to some clips on that because I've got some good clips that went missing in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. A lot, 50,000 votes on those cards. A lot of abnormalities going on in Pennsylvania. There were a lot of non-resident voters. You know, there's a group out there called Voter Integrity Project that's been analyzing the data, and they've calculated that 20,312 people who are no longer Georgia residents or didn't meet the residency requirements in Georgia voted in the election. Now, Biden's margin of victory in Georgia is a little bit under 13,000 votes, right? So that's a big deal. There were a lot of chain of custody breakdowns where, there was really no one watching the counting. There was no one verifying that the ballots that were being run through the counters were the actual ballots. There was no one checking the USBs that were all over the place. I mean, how hard would it be to slide in some extra USBs or to trade out some extra USBs? And then you had a ton of statistical anomalies, things that just aren't possible in terms of the percentage breakdown. Like in Georgia, with 89% of the votes already counted, President Trump was ahead. But then Biden somehow, for the next 53 batches of votes that were input into the system or counted, just input into the system, Biden led Trump by the exact same statistical margin of 50.05 to 49.95 in every single batch. So how do they all match up just perfectly? Well, let's go to there were a couple of big things that happened last week. There was the filing by Sidney Powell Wednesday evening, which is fascinating. It's 104 pages. I'm going to give you one little piece of it in a minute if we can get to it. It's going to be impossible to cover the whole thing. But suffice it to say, there are major problems in every aspect of this election, from ballot harvesting all the way to the software. But I want you to listen. There was also a press conference in Pennsylvania last week that was a big deal. I want you to listen to this press conference, where Rudy Giuliani was there, Jenna Ellis was there. It was primarily run by Rudy Giuliani. The president was supposed to be there live, but they ended up deciding to hold off on him going there live because Giuliani had been allegedly exposed to somebody with coronavirus, and so they decided to keep the president away, and he called in and did about a 10-minute call-in to the hearing, which was fascinating. But you got to hear about this because, there were about 600,000 votes added in a very strange spike in Pennsylvania. And when this was covered at the press conference, the crowd literally gasped and was actually laughing at it.
To see
Listen to
a
this.
smooth curve going up, not any big spikes. That's kind of what Greg was talking about, the anomalies of loading and uploading those votes. So that big spike that occurs there is a prime indicator of fraudulent voting.
And that's 604,000 votes in 90 minutes, is that right?
Correct. This is 337 votes, 337,000 votes in that
period of time.
Yes.
And when you look at this entire curve with all these spikes, can you calculate how much of a vote that accounted for Biden and how much for Trump?
Close to 600,000. I think our figures were about 570 some odd thousand that all those spikes represent over time.
For Biden?
Correct.
And how much for Trump?
I think it was a little over 3,200.
Can you believe that? Listen to the crowd. The fix is in, folks.
Just to go back to your original...
The fix is in. Think about it. In these spikes in Pennsylvania, 570 some odd thousand for Joe Biden. How many for President Trump? 3,200? It's just not possible. That's a false vote. They added votes to the system. They fixed this election. They did that in every place that we've talked about. They did it in Nevada. They did it in Arizona. They definitely did it in Georgia. It's so obvious. This is just one example. By the way, there's going to be another one of these press conferences today in Arizona at noon. Now, the mainstream media didn't cover this one in Pennsylvania. There were a bunch of sitting Pennsylvania legislators there at the press conference. In fact, they're the ones, the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and the Senate called this press conference. And, of course, shortly thereafter, of course, Twitter banned the guy who was basically the ringleader among the Pennsylvania legislatures, Colonel Doug Mastriano. How much time have we got, Shriner? Do we have a couple of minutes? I've got a clip that's No, we don't. There goes the music. Well, I wanted to play a clip introducing a guy. We've just got we've got too much audio. We need about 3 hours. Well, we really need more than that to cover all this stuff.
You can stick around during my show if you want. We'll keep going.
So, let's talk about that, Shriner. We've just got too much to cover, and I had a setup clip because I wanted you to hear the number of military officers, and particularly military intelligence officers that are testifying in this situation is noteworthy. You have to decide. Do you think these people are just wholesale lying? Do you think they're throwing away their entire lives and their entire careers, all their integrity, for what? For 15 seconds of media notoriety, and the media isn't even covering it. You've got to watch Right Side Broadcasting Network even to see these press conferences.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Never enough time to get to everything, Morgan. Are we going to get to go out there, or is just the world we're living in out there enough for us?
Well, you tell me. What do you think? I mean, it's pretty out there so far. I wanted to, and I do want to cover a little bit of this because I thought this was so impressive, but you're going to have to, it's not going to be easy to find. I wish I could say that you could go out there and easily find this. Like I said, you had to be watching Right Side Broadcasting Network even to see the press conference in Pennsylvania last week. But at this press conference, a gentleman named Gregory Strenstrom spoke. He said he's from Delaware County. He's a former commanding officer in the Navy, a veteran of foreign wars. He's now the CEO of his own private company. He's a data scientist, a forensic computer scientist, and an expert in security and fraud. And among other things, he talked about the chain of custody issues that we've mentioned here, including the fact that 47 of these USB drives have gone missing. Now, let's hear from him. Just a short clip here. Let's hear.
What I saw there was a chain of custody in all cases that was broken. It was broken for the mail-in ballots, the Dropbox ballots, the Election Day USB V-card flash drives. In all cases, the chain of custody and the procedures that were defined by the Delaware County Board of Elections and Election Process Review they didn't follow one. I couldn't even redline this multi-page document because the entire document would be, they didn't follow any of the procedures.
So what he was sharing there, that document
was a chain of custody.
Is, the procedures that they were supposed to be following. And what he's saying is they didn't follow any of those procedures. Not only did they change the procedures, but they didn't follow any of the ones that they had in place. Now, this is a more interesting clip than that one was, although that one was interesting. This is another Department of Defense, former DOD, cyber warfare specialist, and I believe he signed the redacted declaration that supports the Sidney Powell, Georgia lawsuit. But I want you to hear this portion of this clip. It's fascinating. Listen to what he says very carefully.
Good afternoon, Senator, Colonel, and gentlemen, ladies. My name is Phil Waldron. I'm a retired Army colonel, 30 years. Spent the first half of my career, just like Colonel Mastriano here, as a cavalry officer conducting armed reconnaissance, counter-reconnaissance. Last half of my career spent in information warfare as a psychological operations officer and information operations officer, conducted computer network operations, electronic warfare, special electronic warfare, deception, counter-deception, and OPSEC, and a couple other specialties.
Sir, sorry.
You still got a Stetson and Spurs. So I spent all of my time as an operations officer. My perspective looking at this problem set is how to break in, how to break it, how to destroy it, how to manipulate it. And my team has been researching this specific issue since August, but we're working with another team that's been intently working on this problem set, the voting machine manipulation, for 2 years, since the Ted Cruz and Beto race in Texas in 2018 and the Kentucky governor's race, where there were significant anomalies observed. And I'd like to add that there are many, many more teams like ours, small teams that are joined in this fight, and they're throwing the flag left and right. So there's a lot of folks who are recognizing anomalies. The voting systems in the U.S. And in Pennsylvania were built to be manipulated. They've been used in elections around the world and stolen elections around the world in Venezuela, Italy, Argentina, Singapore, Bolivia, as close as 2 weeks ago.
Listen.
The Philadelphia uses ES&S, Pittsburgh uses Dominion, other counties in Pennsylvania use Dominion and other systems. So what's the real deal? So all of these election systems have a common DNA. SGO Smartmatic sold Sequoia voting systems to Dominion in 2010. And then the Diebold company spun off Premier Election Systems to Dominion as a result of an antitrust suit. So the bottom line is that these systems have similar code and similar functions. And just so you know, I know there have been statements to the contrary, but I personally debriefed the son of a Cuban intelligence officer who had firsthand knowledge of
Listen to this.
Hugo Chavez's family members who told him not to worry about the populist threat against Maduro's election in Venezuela, quote unquote, that it was guaranteed. Their father invested the money to build the SGO voting machine system. So I have no reason to doubt this gentleman. He's sworn an affidavit to this effect. But that's the root of the SGO voting machines. So these systems are not what you've been told. They are connected to the internet and servers outside of the U.S. They're connected from top to the bottom in the middle. There is no transparency, as our previous witnesses mentioned, as to how the voter information is processed, how and where it's stored. The voting record is able to be modified and or deleted by operators, administrators, and outside threats. Operators can assign votes for write-in ballots, blank ballots, or error ballots in large numbers so that they can be directed toward one candidate or another at the operator's or supervisor's discretion. And many experts have published how easily these machines can be hacked to manipulate votes. As a matter of fact, one of our white hat hackers previously discovered a malware that's present on the servers that captures every login and every password of every operator down to the precinct level that logs into one of these systems. It's just like giving the password to your bank account out, putting it on the dark web. It's not going to be there very long. And just so you probably are all aware, on 30 September, an election storage facility was robbed in your state. 30 USB devices were stolen and a laptop.
In Pennsylvania.
Those USB devices more than likely had encryption devices, and you've just heard another previous witness talk about the non-standard use of the USB storage devices. So these systems, in a nutshell, allow authorized and unauthorized users to cancel votes, shift votes, preload votes, vote blank ballots, all in real time and in large numbers. They're connected.
Think about that. He was going to say they're connected to the internet and other things. But think about that. It allows both the supervisors and the workers on site who are managing these machines to essentially do whatever they want with the votes, in addition to the fact that they're connected to the internet and obviously very easily hacked, and so could be being controlled or manipulated by people who are not even the official workers or the supervisors. Is that how you want your election handled? Do you want the votes counted by Venezuelans controlled by the Chavistas? Or should the votes be counted here in the U.S. and free from manipulation? Well, we're not going to get to the COVID study, really, but suffice it to say, the total deaths from COVID match the exact number of decrease in total deaths from other causes at the same time. So magically, all the COVID deaths disappeared from other causes from the standard. We'll see you next week, folks. I'm Morgan Streetman. That's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.